Hey, and welcome back. So let's be honest, everyone likes a bit of money. So, you can go and treat yourselves, just like you might be able to treat yourself to get one of these little, like, tundsdev probably. So just be warned, 2023, I might be dropping something. Anyway, so in this video, I'm going to be showing you how to build this view that you can actually see on the screen and how you can add this into your app to get tips from users. So this actually covers quite a few things, and what we're going to look and discover is how to actually use the StoreKit 2 API, and also as well how it makes our life easier to actually make retrieve products and make purchases using Swift concurrency. We'll also see how we can actually manage our purchases as well in Xcode and also TestFlight as well, and handle all the edge cases that you may come across. Also, we'll go over some important things that I feel that you should know when you're working with in-app purchases. So by the end of this video, you should be able to have a tip jar in your app to finally treat yourself and buy all the pumpkin spice lattes that you want in the world. So let's get into it. Before we just dive straight into the code, I think it's really important that we discuss, what is StoreKit? Well, essentially, it's an Apple framework that allows you to perform in-app purchases within your app, meaning that users can actually purchase goods, within your apps. Now, most services that you use that allow you to make in-app purchases are essentially just a wrapper around StoreKit. So why in this tutorial did I decide to show you how to build a tip jar without needing any third-party libraries such as RevenueCap? Well, recently at WW22, Apple introduced StoreKit 2, which actually makes it even easier for us to actually make in-app purchases. So when you actually work with in-app purchases, normally you have 4 different types, and you normally have the 4 different types where each one has its own purpose. So behind me, you should see that we've got the Apple documentation open in terms of the differences between different consumables or subscriptions and whatnot. And if you actually look at the screen, which one does our view or our app fall into? Well, it's actually a consumable, because it's kind of like when you eat something. When you eat something, it's gone. Once you use it, that's it. You've got rid of it. Now, when someone actually gives you a tip, they don't actually get anything back in return. So we need to make sure that actually also falls into this category. So that we're going to be working with consumables that fall into this bracket, because you just give someone something and you don't get anything in return. So what I want to do is actually just take a brief look at the project where we'll actually be adding in our in-app purchases. So we're in the project here. And what I just want to do is to show you the, app in terms of how it works, and also the files that I'm actually already going to supply to you. So in this video, we're mainly going to be focused on the StoreKit side of things. So we're not going to be building out all the UI. So if you want to actually follow along, I'll actually have a link in the description box and also on the screen for you to go and check out and get these starter files. So if I just tap on tip me, you'll see here that right now it's just using some static dummy content. It's not real, product information. And if I tap on the X, it dismisses it. And if I tap on the screen on the back, it also dismisses it as well. Now, another thing as well that we've also got as well is that if I change the theme to be dark mode, it also handles dark mode too. So it looks pretty nice in dark mode and works the exact same way. So a lot of this UI is already done just to help speed up this video, so we're not focusing on the stuff that, let's be honest, we're all here for StoreKit, right? So let's focus on that. Okay, cool. So we've gone through the project setup, and what I want to do now is actually just look at one really important thing that we should actually do as well. So when you're working with in-app purchases, you're actually able to create a capability for that, so that your apps are able to actually, make those kind of sales. So what we're going to do now is actually look at how we can add that capability to our Xcode project. Now, in order to do that, what you want to do is on your actual project here, you want to select it, and then not on the project here, on the actual target that you want, you then want to go to capability. And when you go to capability, you'll get this drop down. Now in here, you've got 2 options. You can either choose the grid way or this way, but I'm just going to go with the list like this because it's clearer for me. But we're actually going to type in here in app, and you should see in-app purchase. So you want to add this capability to your Xcode project so you can actually, get your in-app purchases working. So once you add that, that's it. The capability will be added to your project. Now, for me, my signing is managed automatically, but if you're someone who's using provisioning profiles, it's possible that they actually might get invalidated and you have to recreate them. So just keep that in mind. But if you've got automatic signing, Xcode will just handle everything for you. So now that we've gone through all of that, what I want to do is just briefly talk about, in-app purchases. Starting with WW20, there's actually a way for us to easily mock and create like fake products within Xcode. So we don't ever need to create a build for TestFlight. We can just build it all locally and then create our products remotely on AppStoreConnect. And that's done using a StoreKit configuration file. So let's look at how we can create one. So in order to create one, all we need to do is just simply hit File, New, and then you should see that we can create a new file, or you can hit Command N if you want to. And then if you type in the filter StoreKit, you should see something called a StoreKit configuration file. So this file, essentially, like I said before, it just allows you to mock up and create fake products that you can test locally. So let's hit next. Now, when you create a file, you actually have two options here. So you can create a local file that you just use locally and then create those products later in AppStoreConnect, or you can actually choose the option to sync your file with app called AppStoreConnect, and it will download those products for you, so you can use them within your project. Now that sync option is something that's quite new. We're going to be doing it the way of where we actually just set up some fake products, and then later on in this video, we'll set up some products in AppStoreConnect. So I'm just going to call this file My Tips Store Kit Configuration. Cool. Sweet. And then hit next. Cool. So now we have our StoreKit configuration file. Now, before we create any product, there's one thing that you need to be wary of. So when you actually create a StoreKit configuration file, and I'm just going to make this smaller because we're not using this no more, it's worth noting that it's not actually set up for you automatically. So you actually have to tell Xcode to use this file to get products from. So essentially simulate the App Store using this file. And you can do that by clicking on the scheme and choosing edit scheme. So that's your target. And if you click on the run option and go to options, you should see that you actually have a drop down for StoreKit configuration. Now in here, you should see the file that you've just created. If you don't see it, then you can choose add StoreKit configuration to project and select the file locally from your folder path. So we're going to select this file and then hit close. So it looks like nothing's happened at all. But what will happen is that when we create products in here and we request them, we will see them on our UI. So how do you create a product? Well, in order to create a product, all you need to do is just hit the plus button in the bottom here, and you'll see you have different types of products that you can actually create. Now we want a consumable, so let's add a consumable. And you should see that you get a whole bunch of options that you can fill out. So let's actually just, break these down. So you have a reference name, and that essentially is just the name of your product. So this reference name isn't what's displayed on the UI to the user. It's just the name of the entire item. So we're going to be working with different tips on, different levels. So I'm just going to work with a tiny tip, small tip. I'm going the wrong way around. Tiny tip, small tip, medium tip, large tip. So we're going to be going, up in prices. So let's just put in here, tiny tip, and that's just going to be the name of our product. So you also have a product ID, which essentially is just a unique identifier for your product. Now, a habit that I like to do is to use my bundle identifier plus the name of the tip to keep it all consistent. So I don't have different bundle identifiers. It's just easier for me to track. So we'll go onto our project, and on our sign-in capabilities, we'll copy this, and then we'll go back into our StoreKit configuration. Wow, you can see all the tabs I have open, man. You can tell that I'm a tab guy that has like over 100 tabs. So yeah, if you're someone like that, then shout outs to you, bro. So now that we've done that, what we want to do is put in here our product ID. And then after here, we're just going to say dot tiny tip, all of it, like camel case, like so. Cool. So that's the ID for our tip. Now the price here is basically just a price for the item. Now it's worth noting that this isn't a real price that you can set in AppStoreConnect, because they have their own matrix with tiers that you have to choose. So you can't just enter any pricing. This is purely just for testing purposes. So you can put any number in here, and it's just to show that number on the screen. So we'll leave that at this price because it's a tiny tip. So continuing on, we also have the localizations bit here where we put our display name and our description. So this is what gets presented on the screen to the user. So for your display name, you can actually, by default here, you can see it's English US. So let's actually put in a display name. Okay, cool. And I will argue this until the grave, but for me, the Cruller is the best donut, yeah. If you're part of Cruller gang, leave a comment in the comment description, man, because to me, Tim Hortons Cruller, you cannot go wrong. So it's worth noting that when you're actually using your description and your display name, you can't put special characters within your display name. So if you want any like emojis and stuff, save it for the description and then you hit done. So what you could also do as well is actually add in different localizations for different languages. So based on the storefront that you're on, the text will look, different based on that country's language. But we're not going to do that within this video. But if that's something you want to do, then set it up. Cool. So now we've got all of our, product set up. So what I just want to do now is actually just test out just fetching a single product. So I don't want to do anything crazy. I just want to show you how to get a product and just show it on the screen. So in order to do that, I know we already have our files here, but I'm actually going to create a new SwiftUI file purely just for testing this out. So let's create a new file and a new SwiftUI view. And I'm just going to call this test view for now, because we're going to delete. It's not going to be something that we actually use within this video. So what we can do is, in order to actually use the StoreKit API, we need to first of all import StoreKit like so. So when you're working with items that you set up in your configuration or subscriptions, whatever it may be, it's actually a product. So we want to store a state property of our product in our SwiftUI view here. Let's actually just create a state property called my product. Now I've made this optional because it might be nil and we're just doing something quick, but essentially the product is what actually holds the information of all the stuff that we actually set up before in the configuration and more. So all the information about an item is encapsulated within the product API. So we're going to be using Swift concurrency because that's what the StoreKit 2 API is built on top of, to make it easier for us to fetch products. And if you want to learn more about Swift concurrency, I actually have a free course on my channel where you can learn everything that you need to know. So in here, what we're going to do is actually just embed this within. I'm not having a good day with Xcode. For some reason, Xcode is not liking me. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a VStack the manual way, and I'm just going to paste this in here like so. And then on the VStack, we're going to use the task modifier like so. So we're just going to say my product is equal to, and then try, and then await. And when you want to fetch a product, you actually have a function on product called products for. And what this does, it actually takes an array of identifiers to actually fetch for you, so you can specify what products you want to fetch for your app. Now, for now, we're just going to leave this empty. And then I just want to get the first one. Cool. So if I was to run this now, nothing's actually going to happen because I've not told this function the identifiers that I want it to get. So what is this identifier? Well, this identifier is the ID that you actually set up within your StoreKit configuration file. And if we actually open this up here, it's actually this product ID right here. So you want to copy this product ID and then you want to paste that in here. And that will essentially get you that. So now what we want to do is display information relating to the product on the screen. So I'm just going to type this out and then we'll break it down. So when you're working with a product, like I said before, you have different properties to access different things that you want, right? So we have the display name, as you can see here, which is display name here, description, which is description, and display price, which is the actual display price. So display price is a bit different. So display price is not actually the price that you see here. It's actually a property that's formatting the price for you based on a user's locale. So if I was in England, which I am, it would show me the price in pounds. But if it was on America, it would show me the price in dollars. Now, if you want to access the actual price, like the monetary value without it being formatted, there's a property called price. So if we were to just say here, text, and then if we just say my product dot price dot description, this will actually get me the price in I think this is a decimal. Yeah, the price in a decimal, so monetary value. So this is useful if you need to do things like discounts and calculate stuff. You can do that directly on this property. So what I want to do now is let's just close this so we can get more real estate. And then I want to just run this and show you what happens. So let's just run this on the simulator. But before we run it on the simulator, we need to actually set this as our new root view within our app entry point. So rather than this being home view, this could be test view. And let's just run this. And you'll see that we actually get a breakdown of our product. So we get a breakdown of our product with like the price and also the decimal, etc., and all that other good stuff. So it's worth noting that, like I said before, I live in the UK. So right now, this is showing me the price in dollars. And you might be wondering, why is it doing that? Well, by default, it's actually set to the storefront of America. Now, if you want to change your storefront, what you have to do is actually click on your configuration file here. And if you go to editor, you'll see options here for default storefront and also default localization. So these two things allow you to change what the default localization should be and also the default storefront, so you can test what it looks like in different, regions. Now I'm just going to change the storefront for me to be, for the default storefront for me to essentially be the pound. So where is Great Britain or the United Kingdom? It'll be, so there, the United Kingdom. Let's just select United Kingdom. And now this time, let's just rerun it. Okay, cool. And as you can see here, it's now showing me the price in pounds, which is what I want to see. So this is 99p, which is what I want. Cool. So we've already saw how to basically create, one product in the StoreKit configuration file. But now what I want to do is actually get a list of products and display that on the UI. So let's just go into my tip store configuration, and I'm just going to create some products and then, break it down. So this is the boring part. So I'm going to speed this up. All right, cool. So I've actually created all the products now. So we have our tiny tip and we also have our small tip and we have our medium and large. So you can see each one has their own price and their own unique, product ID. So they're not the same. So what we need to do now to actually get a list of our products is actually create a constant that's going to store the IDs. So I'm going to create a new Swift file and it's just going to be an empty file. I'm going to call this my products identifiers. Cool. And this is going to be an array that's a constant that holds an array of our products. Okay, cool. So this is simply just our array that holds all of our identifiers, within this single file, which is all we need to do. Cool. So now what we want to do is we actually want to use the views that I've created for you within this, and we need to create some kind of class that holds all of our products. So I'm just going to create a new file called our tips store. Now, the reason why I'm not calling this a view model is because it isn't really a view model. It's not specific for that view. This is something that our entire app is going to use. And it's not, like I said, the purpose of a view. It's more of a store that holds all of the products that we'll be working with. So let's create a new Swift file and we'll call it tip store. And then we'll create a class. So this will be and I'm going to mark it as an observable object because we want our views to observe this class. So in order to actually get our products and store them within this class, we're going to need to use StoreKit. So let's just import StoreKit. And I actually want to create a function in here that's closed off that helps me just retrieve products using async await. So we'll say private extension on the tip store. And then I'm just going to create a function called retrieve products. Cool. So this function is what we're going to call when our store is initialized. So when our store is initialized, we're going to fetch all our products and store them within here. Now I've marked this function with the main actor annotation because views are going to be listening to these products. So we need to update our UI on the main thread. So now that we have this function, let's create a publish property to actually listen to these updates. This is going to be our array that a view can listen to see what products are available. So our retrieve products, we can now start to write the code for actually fetching it. Now, because this function doesn't throw, we're just going to do a do catch and handle the error within the scope of this store. So within our catch, we'll handle our error a bit later, but within, actually, we'll just print it out just to see if something does go wrong. So within our do, this is where we're now going to actually get our products from that StoreKit configuration file and then list them within our items or store it within here. So we're going to say let products is equal to product dot products for, and it's literally the exact same code that we use within our test view, but now we're using it within the scope of this view model. And for our collection, what we're going to pass in here is our constant that we created within our identifiers. So it's my tip product identifiers. And then we're going to need to mark this as try await, like so. Cool. So when you're working with products and you're actually fetching them from, the configuration file or from AppStoreConnect. Now, when I created these, I actually created them in order of like prices. But if you're someone who swaps these around and you've not really created them in the right order of prices, it's actually possible that when you fetch them, they don't come back automatically sorted by price. So that's something that you might have to do yourself manually. We can cover that edge case. What we're going to do on our products is actually sort them by their price. So we're going to say sort by, and we're going to say $.price is less than $1.price. Cool. So now this will ensure that our price starts from the lowest first and then goes all the way down to the highest one. So now we have our products. We're going to assign that within our items. So we can just say items is equal to products, like so. Okay, cool. So now we need to create our initializer. So when this view is initialized, we want to trigger our retrieve products function. So in order to do that, we're going to need to create a task within here. And then within this task, we're simply just going to say await retrieve products. And this will now help us fetch our products. So just a little habit that I like to get into is just marking this as a weak self, so we don't retain any memory leaks. Cool. So we'll just do it like so. So what we want to do now is we actually want to initialize this tip store within our home view. So what you want to do is you actually want to set this up on the view before the tips open. And the reason why is because this initializer is going to be created and actually fetch the products for us before the view is presented. So we already want these products loaded in so we don't get like any kind of lag of things missing. So in our home view, we're going to create a state object. And this is going to be our store. So now this is within here. So we actually want our tips view to get those tips that we have within our home view. Now, in order to do that, what we can do is actually use the environment object, property wrapper and environment object modifier to help pass this down a tree to our children. And if you want to learn more about environment object, I actually do have a video on my channel, which I'll link at the top here, that you can actually go and check out. So let's just create that. So on our tips view, we're going to say dot environment object, and then we're just going to pass in our store like so. And then within our tips view, we're going to create an environment object. I'm just going to call this var tip store like so. So now we have access to that within this view. And on our preview, because we're using the environment object property wrapper, we also need to use it on our view like so. And this is just going to have our tip store like so. Cool. So currently within our tip store, we're just using a hard-coded, range of numbers to display the tips on the screen. So we're going to change this. So we're actually going to want to, instead of using this, we want to just use our store.items. So we're going to say store.items like so. And now this will loop through all of the items within our store and display a tips item view. Now I want to also display information from each item within the actual item view. So we're going to need to pass each one through our tips item view like so. So we just click into here. We're actually going to need to create a new constant called item, and it's going to be of type product like so. And then we want to import StoreKit as well, like so. Cool. So where I put these placeholders in, we actually want to replace that with this information from our product. So rather than this being item.display like so, we can just take this out and it'll just be item.display and then item.description. And then for the price, we'll just say item.display price like so. Cool. So in our SwiftUI preview, so because I can't actually create a fake product, what I'm just going to do is actually just pass in here nil. Now I know this isn't going to work because it's expecting a product. So we're just going to change this to be optional. And then now in the places where it's going to complain, I'm just going to pass in a default string like this if it is nil for whatever reason. Now, what you could do if you wanted to is you actually could, write some logic in here to actually fetch that product. But for the purpose of this tutorial, we're just going to make it, optional as a string. So let's just make these optional. Cool. So now that we've added that in, if we go back into our tips view, you should see now it start complaining that, hey, you're meant to pass in an item. So let's just fix that. And then now we want to pass in this item within here like so. Cool. So if we build this, it should build successfully. So what we should be able to do now is actually see our product on the screen. Now, in order to do that, we're going to actually need to go into our building tap jar app. So our main app entry point here, and replace this with our home view, which is the view that I provided for you. So let's just run this and see what happens. You should see the tip me button. And if I tap on it, you'll now see that all the products that I actually set up in the StoreKit configuration file is now displaying on the UI. So it's all being pulled through, which is great. And if I dismiss this, it'll dismiss away. If I reopen it, you'll see that it's all good. Cool. So right now, if you tap on this button to actually try to buy me a cruller donut, nothing's going to happen, right? So what we're going to need to do is we actually need to add in the logic to our store to purchase an item. So let's go into our tip store. And then within here, we're going to create a new function called purchase. So our purchase function takes in a product and it's marked as async because it's asynchronous. So within this function, what we actually want to do now is actually call the purchase function on the item. So because this doesn't throw, we're actually going to do the do catch within this function. So all the error handling is handled within this tip store. So let's print error, and we'll just make a note here to handle errors. Okay, cool. So when you want to actually purchase an item within StoreKit, like I said before, there's a function called purchase. So we can say let result is equal to item dot purchase. And we're going to say try await like so. So this function allows you to purchase an item. Now you might look at this and think that you're done. Well, we're actually not done, because what you do is you actually get a result back from the purchase, and this result essentially just holds the verification status of that purchase that someone has made. So what do I mean by that? So what I mean is that when you actually buy an item using StoreKit, what it will actually do for you is actually verify if the person who bought it is who they are. So it's actually doing a validation on the user to validate their transaction for you automatically. So what we can do after this is we can actually check to verify if the user is verified for this transaction. So what we're going to do is actually create a new function for actually handling this verification. So this is going to be another private function. This is going to be another private function, and it's just going to be called handle purchase. So all the logic for handling a purchase is going to be within this single function. So what I actually want to do is I actually want to make this a bit more clearer, and we're going to create something called a type alias. So think about a type alias as another way of saying a class, so you can kind of mark it with an alternative. So at the top of our file here, we're just going to say type alias, and we're just going to call this purchase result. And then the type that we're going to pass in here for this alias is going to be this here. And then we can use our type alias like so. So this is purely just for readability. So it's just like clearer. This is nothing more than vanity in my eyes, but why not, eh? So what we want to do now is that within our function on the result, we actually want to switch on all of the cases, and actually just simply for now, we'll just print out the states of what's going on. So I'm going to add this in and we'll break it down. Okay, cool. So as you can see, we've got our result and we have our different cases. So we have our success case, pending, and user cancel. So let's just break down what each one means. So success is when the transaction is successful, and the next step it's going to do is actually try to verify the user who made that transaction, like I said before. pending is if something happened during the transaction. So let's say, for example, you're buying something and you haven't updated your card information, or you haven't accepted the latest T's and C's from the App Store, you'd actually hit the pending case because your transaction is still pending. And then user cancelled is when someone just taps on the cancel button within the sheet that pops up from the system when they try to make a purchase, and default will just handle any other default cases that we're not aware of. So what we want to do within our result for our verification is actually check to see if the user is verified. And then in between that process, if they are verified, then we're going to tell the UI that, hey, everything's okay. So in order to do this, let's create another function called check verified. And what we have here is we have a verification result. So essentially this type is the same type from our success associated value. So we're going to pass in this into our check verify function to see if the user is verified. And if you want to learn more about this, so generics, then you actually do have a video on my channel which you can check out. So we actually want to in here check to see the verification result, and based on that either throw an error if it's unverified or throw everything's okay if it is verified. So for the error case, we're just going to create a new enum for our error at the top here. And this here is going to be our enum case for telling us if someone has, failed verification or any other errors. But we just have this case here for failed verification. So now if we just scroll back down, so what we're able to do in here is actually switch on our result. Cool. So what we're saying here is that if the user is unverified, then we're going to throw our error that they failed verification. And if they are verified, then we're just going to return safe, that everything's okay. So we want to use this within our switch here for when we handle a purchase. So after the print statement for when we say it was a success, we want to call our function to check if the user is verified. So what we're going to say here is let transaction is equal to check verified. And then we're going to pass in our verification like so. Now, because this function throws, we need to use the try keyword because it could mess up. And then after we verify our transaction, if we get to this point where I'm about to put this to do, then we know the verification was okay. So we can update our UI. If the verification wasn't okay, then what will happen is that the function will throw an error and will handle that error. But after you finish doing that, you need to make sure when you finish doing the transaction verification that you call the finish function here. So to tell it that, hey, okay, we've finished verifying the transaction and we've now given the user the content that they want. Now, on our case, we're not actually going to be delivering any content. But if you were someone that gave you a tip and you was to maybe give them some extra icons for whatever reason, you'd want to call finish to say, okay, we finished downloading these additional content to give to the user. Now, this function is asynchronous. So we're going to use the await keyword like so. Cool. So now this is all good and all in place. What we want to do is we want to call our handle purchase from result here. Sweet. And then we want to mark this as try and await because it is asynchronous. Okay, so now we handle the purchase. Sweet. So the next thing we want to do is actually update our source files that I provided with you to actually handle that purchase. Let's go back into our tips view. And this time within our tips item view, we're actually going to need to use the environment object property wrapper in here to actually purchase that item. So let's just say at the top here, we'll say at environment object private var store environment object. And because we're using it in this context here, we're just going to also use it on the preview where we say tips store like so. Now that we actually have this in place within our button, this is where we want to actually call our purchase. So because this is optional, the first thing we're going to do is actually just safely unwrap it. And then within here, we're actually going to create a task because the function was using async await. So we need to use it within a task. So now in our task, we can say await, and then we can say store dot purchase and then pass in our item. like so. Cool. So notice how I only create the task if the item is, safely unwrapped. So we can remove this to do because we don't need to handle the purchase anymore. So let's just run this and see what happens. And let's just make this big so you can actually see this. So if I hit tip me, you'll now see that we get our options like we did before. And you know what? I'm feeling nice. Let's treat myself to a ribeye steak, right? So let's hit the steak option. And you'll see that we actually get our view telling us, hey, this is the information. So this view here is what you would see on the App Store. But obviously, because we're using an environment, like a sandbox environment, this is just like some dummy fake information. So if I was to actually click on cancel, you'll see that actually get printed out to the logs that the user has canceled their transaction, which is what we checked for before with the print. But if I actually tap on this again, it will show that. And if I hit purchase, you'll see that we make a purchase and we can now get told that we're all set and we're good to go, and we can hit OK. So now we've made that purchase. But if you actually look at our logs here, if I just make this smaller, you'll see that we actually have some warnings here telling us that we're not listening to transaction updates. And we actually have a purple warning within our file for where we make our purchase. Now we're going to get onto this in a second, but what I actually want to do is just show you how we can just handle an entire happy path journey, and then we'll look at what path this covers. So right now, when we make a purchase, our view is still on the screen, so it actually doesn't dismiss or go away from anywhere. So we need to actually, observe some type of property to handle the different states that we're within. Now, in order to do that, we can use an enum. So in our tip store, if we just scroll up, we're going to create a new enum called tips action. And for now, this is simply just going to have one case called successful. Cool. And now we're going to need to create a published property for listening to this action. So what we're going to do is when our verification is all good, we're actually going to set our action to be .successful. So let's just scroll down. And then here, when we get to our verification, rather than this being a to do here, we're just going to say action is equal to .successful, like so. Okay, cool. So what we want to do here is we now want to, when you set this action to be successful, we want to dismiss this screen here, and we want to show a view that says thanks, like I showed in the preview. So in order to do that, I've actually added a new view in here called thank view, which will come with the starter project, so you don't need to worry about this. But we're essentially just going to now go into our home view, and then we've already got one property for show tips. We actually need another one called show thanks. So let's copy this and then we'll paste it and we'll call this show thanks. And by default, it'll be set to false, which is what we want. So now that we have our show thanks in place, we actually now need to listen to the changes within our store, and based on the change of that action, we want to perform some kind of changes to our UI. So what I want to do is animate the tips off the screen and show a thanks view to tell you, hey, I appreciate you for, tipping me, you know what I mean? So let's just scroll down here. And then what we want to do is we want to use the on change modifier to listen to that change within our action. So after our animation here, we're just going to say dot on change of store dot action perform. So I'm going to change this to be action. And within here, we're just going to say if the action is equal to successful, then we're going to run some code. Now the code in here that we're going to run is the code for dismissing and showing views. Now in SwiftUI at this moment in time, there's no nice way to chain, animations. So we're going to have to use a dispatch queue to do this. It's not the best, but it's what we've got at the moment. So here, the first thing I'm going to say is show tips is equal to false, because we don't want to show our tip screen anymore. We want to get rid of that. And then we're going to use a dispatch queue .main.async after now plus half a second to show our thanks. I'm going to say is equal to true. So now our thanks view will appear. So now we have the logic in place for hiding our tips and showing our thanks screen. I'm just going to close this off. But we want to copy what we have here with our overlay, and we want to use another overlay to overlay our thanks view at the bottom of the screen. So after this, we're going to say dot overlay. and we're just going to choose the alignment and set that to bottom. And within the content, if I remove these nasty parameters, I'm not a fan of them. So within here, we're going to say if show thanks, then we're going to show the thanks view. So the thanks view will appear on the screen. So within the thanks view's closure, if someone taps on a close button that we currently have, then we want to hide this thanks view. So we're going to say show thanks is equal to false. Cool. So right now, I actually want the thanks view to copy the same transition as our tips. So let's just copy this transition here, and then we'll just paste that onto our thanks as well. Cool. So we need to also add in an animation for our show thanks, because right now only the show tips is being animated. So we're going to create another spring, but this time for our thanks. Okay, so now we have that in place. So let's actually just test this out and see what happens. And if we just run this, so if I just tap tip me, and then we'll just leave a tip of 99p. If we hit OK, you'll now see that our view dismisses and our thank you screen now appears. And if I hit close, so that's all working fine. But let's just see what happens if I actually want to give myself, another tip. So we'll this time do the pizza one, hit purchase. And when we hit OK, nothing happens. So what's going on here? Well, if you actually look at our code here for our onChange and the way the onChange modifier works, we always set our action to be successful. So technically it hasn't changed. And because of that, the onChange modifier doesn't trigger. So how can we resolve this? Well, what we need to do is we actually need to reset the value inside of action so that when it's set to successful again, we actually get the entire journey flow that we expect. So let's go inside of our tip store and we'll create a function called reset. So after our purchase, we'll create a function called reset. And then we'll simply just set the action back to nil like so. So if we go back into our home view, what we want to do is that after we finish showing our thanks, we'll just say store.reset. This will ensure that it always gets set back to nil, and then we can continue the whole journey again. So let's test this out. So let's run this. And if we hit tip me and we tap on this again and purchase, cool, that appears. And if we try it again, this time with a slice, you'll see that it works. So now we actually handle multiple tips within, the same journey, which is good. So we've looked at the happy path here, but we've not actually handled things going wrong. So within Xcode, you actually don't need to simulate errors with StoreKit by turning off your Wi-Fi and doing all that other stuff. You can actually just do this directly within Xcode itself. Now, I'll show you where this is first, and we're not going to turn this on yet. I just want to show you where it is, and then we'll come back to it. But if you just go to your project folder here and click on your configuration, you'll see when you go to editor, there's actually an option here called failed transactions, and you can select one of these failures to simulate a failure with your transaction. Now, for now, let's just leave this as none, and we'll come back to this later. But what we need to do now is actually update our tip store to essentially hold an error that our view can read from when it needs to. So the first thing we're going to need to do is actually use the alert modifier that comes with SwiftUI. And if you want to learn more about how this works, then check out the video on my channel to learn more about it. So if you just scroll up, what we're going to need to do is actually change our error here to be a localized error so our view can read from a property that we'll create soon. So we'll change this to localized error. And now the second case that we want here is we actually want to display system errors. So the case here is going to be system, and it's going to have an associated value of error. So now we can display system errors within our UI when we want to use this tips error. So scrolling down. So the next thing we need to do is actually give our tips error a description, because when you're working with localized error, for example, this case here, it doesn't know what the description should be on the screen. So we're going to need to tell this localized error what we want it to be. So I'm going to type this out and then we'll break it down. So what we're saying here is that we want, when it's a failed verification, the string to return this string here. And when it's a system error, we're going to use the errors localized description that we get with the error type, which is perfect. So we also need a property for our view to read from if an error has occurred. So this is going to be a Boolean. So if you just scroll down, what we want to do is within here, we want to create a property called has error. And this is going to be false. And it also needs to be a published property because we want to observe the changes to it. Now you might be wondering, why is this not a private set property? And the reason being is that the alert modifier actually changes the value within it. So it actually needs to have access to it to update it when you tap on the OK button to reset has error back to false, or else the alert will never leave the screen. So that's why this needs to be this is why it needs access to the getter and the setter. Now, the next thing we want to do is on our tips action, we only currently track whether something is successful. We also want to track if something has failed as well. So we're going to say case failed. And for our associated value here is going to be our tips error. So we can track what type of tips error has occurred. Now, because we're updating our cases here and we're using associated values, it's actually not aware of how to use the equitable protocol to compare these two cases. So what we want to do is actually implement our own implementation of this protocol. So let's do that now. So essentially what we're saying here is that if they're both successful, the cases on the left and right hand side when we're doing the comparison, then return true. If they're both failed, then compare the localized description. And if they're the same, then return true, or else anything else, just return, false. And we need to do it like this because of our associated value, like I said before. All right, cool. So now what we want to do is actually use this fail case whenever there's actually something going wrong within our tip store. So if you just scroll down, within our catch block here, rather than having a to do, we want to replace this with action is equal to dot failed dot system, and then the error here is going to be the error from our catch block. And if we just keep going down, we also want to replace this here within our retrieve products with our action is equal to dot failed and then dot system error. Now I've left the prints in purely just for debugging purposes, but if you want to take them out, you can take them out. So now we have our actions being set to say, hey, something's gone wrong. We want you to display the alert on the screen. Now, the next thing we need to do is we actually need to tell our store has error property to be true now whenever something fails here or here. Now, if I wanted to, what I could do is I actually could set them both to true within both of those catch clauses. But the reason why I'm actually against that is because while if we get another catch in the future, I might forget to set it there. So instead of us doing it here and here, what we're actually going to do is set it within the did set block. We'll actually change our has error to true. So let's do that now. Okay, cool. So essentially just what we're saying is that if the action is failed, then the has error is going to be true, or else in the default, we're just going to set it to false. Now I could use the if let case pattern matching here, but I feel like this is just easier to read in my opinion. So now that we have this in place, final thing we need to do is actually have a computer property for our alert modifier to actually read from, to actually extract the error to display on the screen, well, the error message. So after our has error published property here, we're going to create a new computed var called error. And its type is going to be tips error because that's where we have our localized descriptions of what we're going to show on the screen. So within this computer property, we're just going to do a switch on the action. And we're going to say here on this case that if it's failed, then I want you to essentially get the error and just return it. So this will return the tips error within the failed Edom case. And if it isn't, so the default, then we're just going to return nil. So we don't return anything. Cool. So now we have everything that we need in place. So if we just go back into our home view, after our on change, we want to use the alert modifier. So if I just say dot and then error, so error, you'll see that I have two options here, but I'm just going to use the first option with the is presented and the error and the actions. So let's hit enter. And the is presented is going to be bound to our store dot has error. And the error here is going to be store.error, like so. Now for our actions, we don't have any button actions that we want to put within this alert. So we don't need any actions. So we can just leave that empty like so. Cool. So what we're going to do now is I'm actually going to click on the configuration and we're going to set our error to be an unknown, which is just like a general error. So let's rerun this. And then we'll tap tip me and then we'll click on this and then purchase. And you'll see that we actually don't see our alert on the screen. And you'll also see that we have a whole bunch of warnings here within the console. So what's going on? Well, if you just click into your warnings here and you see that we actually have 2 new warnings. And the problem that we have is that we're actually updating our UI again from a background thread. So how can we resolve this? Well, what we want to do is we actually want to put this on the main thread and we also want to put this on the main thread as well. Now, rather than me having to use the main actor on every single function and property, which isn't efficient, what we should do is actually just cut the main actor from here. And this time we'll place it on our class. So now any properties that our UI listens to for UI updates will automatically now be put onto the main thread. So we don't need to add this to every single function and property. So let's just rerun this and see what happens. And we'll do that again. So this time we'll say 99 purchase. And this time you'll now see that we actually get our error on the screen telling us that it's unable to complete the request. So we're able to show the user some kind of feedback. So if I hit OK, and the cool thing about testing these errors in Xcode is that you don't actually need to rerun your app again when you change a configuration. What we can do is just click on our configuration, go to editor, fill transactions, none, and then we can try to do this tip again. And this time you'll see that we get a successful and OK. And our flow continues like it did before, which is exactly what we want. Cool. So now we've handled the happy path and we've also handled like error handling. Now there's one thing that I said we'll go look into and now is the time we finally reached the limit. So this is the problem we're going to look into. So the problem that we have now is that we've actually got this warning here telling us that we're not listening to transaction updates. So what does this mean? Well, essentially what this is saying is that when you're purchasing stuff in, on your phones, it's possible for that to be interrupted. Now it can be a whole bunch of reasons as to why it's interrupted. Your phone might die. You might need to accept the latest terms and conditions. You may also need to update your billing information, whatever it may be. But essentially, if you don't listen to the updates, you may miss out on actually verifying your user and providing them with that content if that's something that you're meant to give them. So let's use an example of if someone tips me, I want to give someone a badge. If I actually don't listen to those updates when their purchase was interrupted, they will never get the badge. So we need to actually listen to these interruptions using an async sequence. Now, this doesn't use combine because we're using Swift concurrency. And if you want to learn more about combine, I'll leave a link to the video and you see it on the screen here. But essentially, what we need to do is we actually need to just set up our listener when our store is initialized. So if you actually look at our app right now, we currently set up our tip store within our home view. Now it's actually possible that this home view might not be the first view that gets created when our app is launched. So because of that, we may miss out on these updates when we're listening to them. So what we want to do is we actually want to move this to be in our main app entry point. So let's just cut this or let's just copy it. And we want to move it this time to our root here like so. So because of this, we'll want to use the environment object modifier and pass in our store. And then within our home view, we'll want to update this to now be an environment object and the store to just say the type is tip store. And we'll also update our preview. Pause. And we'll also update our preview. Okay, Cool. So now we have all of that in place. So now because we've done this simple change, whenever our app launches, we'll automatically be able to listen to any updates and deliver that content to the user. So going back into our tip store, we now need to create a type alias for our listener because in my opinion, I feel like the declaring the type for a task looks nasty. So in here, we'll create a type alias and we'll just call it transaction listener. And it's going to be a task void error like so. Okay, cool. So now we need to create a property for our listener within our store. So we just scroll down here. So after our error, we'll just say, and then the type here is going to be transaction listener like so. Cool. So we now got our property set up for actually listening to our transactions. So we need a function to actually configure and create this transaction listener. So let's just scroll down to our private extension here, and before our retrieve products, I'm actually going to create a new function called configure transaction listener. And this function is simply going to return a transaction listener. So now we have our function for configuring our transaction listener. So within here, because our transaction listener is a task, we're going to need to create a task within here that will return to actually listen to these updates. Now, the task that I'm going to create is a detached task. And the reason why is because we can actually let this task kind of just set itself up and do what it needs to do separately away from any other task. So I'm just going to say here task dot detached. And I'm going to set the priority here to make sure that it's on a background. It doesn't need a super high priority like user instantiated. And then within the operation block, this is where we're now going to set up our listener for our transaction. So when you're listening to updates for transactions, there's actually a property on transactions called updates. And this is an async sequence. So if you want to learn more about Swift concurrency as well in terms of like detached tasks and all this other stuff, then check out my free course that I'll actually link here. So within here, we're going to have to listen to all the updates that we receive. And based on that, we're going to verify those transactions. So in order to do that, we're going to need to use a do catch because it's possible for this to throw an error. And within this catch, I'm just going to print the error. But we're also going to set the action to be equal to our .failed.system error. So we can present the alert if something goes wrong. So we're actually going to get an error here, and that's fine. We'll get onto this in a second. So within our do, we're going to say in here that we want to say for await results in transaction.updates. And this is the async sequence where you listen to those updates. So after here, we're going to go within here and we're going to basically verify that transaction so that we can either handle maybe presenting that content to the user, or in our case, it's simply just going to be saying thanks to them. So let's just say let transaction is equal to try check verified, and then the result we're going to pass in here is the result. So we're just going to reuse our check verified function that we created before. Cool. And then after this, we're going to say action is equal to successful because they reached this point, an error hasn't been thrown. And then like I said before, you need to actually call finish on your transaction. So this is going to be await transaction dot finish. Cool. So we have a few errors here, and the reason why we have these errors is because we're trying to edit these properties within a state that isn't within, on the main thread. So in order to fix this, what we've got to do is actually use the app main actor annotation. And what I'm also going to do as well is say weak self in like so. Cool. So this will complain and say that I'm not using self. So we're just going to update this to be like this. Cool. So now you should see that all of those errors now go away. So now we have our function set up for actually listening to updates whenever we get a new transaction update. We need to actually use this and listen to this as the first thing when our object is initialized. So we just scroll up. So what we want to do is that before our task here, we actually want to configure our listener. So we're going to say transaction listener is equal to configure transaction listener like so. So now that will set up our transaction. So another thing that you want to do as well, and it's just a good habit to get into, is when let's say we're in a situation where our store moves into a different view for whatever reason. Right now, our listener never gets deallocated. So we actually never remove it from memory. So what we actually want to do is actually make sure that we just have some code in there to handle any edge cases where our object isn't de-initialized. So in order to do that, we're just going to say dinit, and then on our transaction listener, we're just going to call cancel like so. So now we're ensuring that if we're ever in a situation where our object does get disposed of, we always make sure that we destroy our listener so it's not just hanging around in the background. So let's just run this and see if our warning goes away. And you'll instantly realize that our warning has now gone away. So we don't actually have any more warnings telling us that we're not listening to any updates, which is good. So how can we actually just test out our transaction listener to see if it actually is working? Well, starting with Xcode in dub20, we actually can now manage our StoreKit transactions within Xcode. So we don't actually need to create a sandbox account anymore and be uploading builds to TestFlight. We can actually just do it all directly in Xcode. So what we're going to do is we're going to just click on our StoreKit configuration again. And then this time when you go to editor, you'll now see there's an option here called enable interrupted purchases. So this allows you to simulate if a purchase was interrupted. So let's turn this on. Cool. So now that this is turned on, what we can now do is if we hit tip me and I try to purchase this, you'll now see that I actually don't get the flow where it dismisses and I get a thank you. Instead, in the console, I get told that the user needs to complete some action. And if you remember, if we go into our tip store, this print statement is from our pending case. So now our transaction is still technically pending. So what we could do is, so what we can do now, because that transaction is stuck in a pending state, we can actually manage this transaction directly within Xcode. So you can do that by simply tapping this button here to manage StoreKit transactions. And you'll now get a view where it shows you all of the transactions that you've done, whilst you were testing. So if you just quickly just look at the UI, you can now see I've got a list of all of the transactions. And if I tap on, well, click on one of them, on the right-hand panel, I get a bunch of information about what the state is. As you can see here, this was unfinished and it has billing issues and the dates it was purchased and the details and whatnot. If I go to another one, you'll see that I don't have those issues. So in here, if I wanted to, I can actually delete transactions. So I could delete this one here if I wanted to, and it will now go away. But what we want to do is this one here where it's failed and we have this little card with the billing information. We essentially want to simulate someone sorted out their issue and they're now going to continue, within the app. So before we do that, just so I can show you that this is going to trigger on our side, if we just scroll up to our transaction listener, if we just put a breakpoint within our transaction updates online here. So after that, what we'll now do is let's just purchase a fresh one that has issues. Okay, cool. So this is failed. And now if I hit resolve issues, you'll now see that our breakpoint actually gets triggered. So now we're actually listening to these interruptions. And whenever someone comes back from resolving their issue, we'll get notified within this async sequence. So if I just continue this on, you'll see that the view gets dismissed and we now get a thank you screen popping up telling us that, hey, thank you for the tip. So what we could also do is simulate a situation where someone has like closed the app and they've maybe run it fresh again. So let's do that now. So I'm going to make a tip here. And then this time I'm actually going to stop the app from running and then we're going to rerun it. And you'll see that when I rerun the application, the failed transaction is automatically preloaded in there. So now if I hit resolve, you'll see that it hits our breakpoint. And we now get our thank you screen telling us that thank you for the tip, which is exactly what we want. Now, something that we want to make sure that we always do when we're working with interrupted purchases, because this will get really annoying if you forget this, is simply by clicking on the configuration and making sure that you actually turn it off. So disable it. So make sure that you disable the interrupted purchases. So cool. So now we've handled, the happy path, we've handled the errors, and we've also now handled as well interruptions with our purchases, so we can deliver our content or say thank you to the user when it's done. The next thing we need to do now is actually go into AppStoreConnect and look at how we can actually set up our products so that you can actually put this live onto the App Store so people can actually give you a tip. It's worth noting that with AppStoreConnect, I'm not going to go into too much detail about how to get an account and whatnot. If you want to learn more about how to set up an account and upload an app to the App Store, then be sure to check out this video that I'll be putting on the screen now. But let's go into AppStoreConnect and look at this dummy app that I've set up now. So we're in AppStoreConnect here, and I'll be honest with you, this is like a really important step. If you don't do this step, trust me, you will want to retire from iOS development. So when you actually submit your app, for review for an app reviewer, they're essentially downloading a preview of your build. Now, there's certain things that you need to do for the review to actually see your in-app purchase, because when you set up your in-app purchase, which we'll look into in the next section, it's currently in like a review stage, and we don't have certain things on your account set up and ready. They won't see it, and essentially during the app review they'll just reject your submission. So what you need to do is, the first thing that you need to check out for is you need to make sure that your agreements, tax and banking is all set up. So in AppStoreConnect, if you click on, I went a bit quick there, but if you click on this here, what will happen is that you'll basically get this screen. Now, I've already filled out all of my agreements, so if you've not filled out yours, you should see that you have to accept and fill out your agreements and whatnot. If you are the owner or the account holder, you can do that. So even an admin can't do that. So if you're someone who's working on a team, you're going to need the owner to do this. But if you're just like a solo dev on your own, you should be able to do this and not have any issues. But essentially, you should have to, fill out all of this and go through each of these tabs and make sure that everything is okay. Now, I'm not going to go on this banking tab because it shows my banking information and I've got a mortgage to pay. I'm not trying to be broke. But essentially make sure that everything here is sorted out before you continue. So I can't stress this enough. Now, the next thing we're going to do after this is actually look at how to set up products in AppStoreConnect. So we'll just go back and we'll go back into our app. So if you just go back and go into my apps, you should be able to click into your app. And then from there, we'll set up the in-app purchase for the app as well. So if I actually want to test out these in-app purchases, on an actual device that's not on Xcode, that simulates something close to the App Store, I could use TestFlight. And I actually have a video on TestFlight that you can check out that I'll put on the screen now. But when you go into your application, you should see an option here in features called in-app purchases. And this is where you create the in-app purchases that will be displayed when you actually launch your app onto the App Store, do an update. So you need to actually create these because they're not automatically synced from that file to this. So all you need to do is hit create, and then you'll select the type it is. So in our case, this is going to be a consumable. Now, if you're working with subscriptions, you can see there's an option here for subscriptions that you can configure, but we're not doing that. Now, for the reference name, all we're going to do is simply copy the information from our local file into this because it's the exact same setup. So if we go into our store configuration file, so we're just going to copy tiny tip and then paste that in here. And then for the product ID, we've got to copy that and then paste that in here. Cool. Now, what you want to do is actually do this for, every single, product. But what I'm just going to do in this case for this tutorial is just basically do just one product. And then if you have more than one, you can add them all in. So let's actually just break down everything that you need to fill out on this bit here. So if you scroll down, you'll see here that when you're creating an in-app purchase, it actually does say missing metadata. So the way this works is that when you submit your first in-app purchase, you actually need to get it reviewed by Apple first. So you actually need to give them metadata so that they can review it and see what it looks like. So that's what this metadata is telling us, is that we need to fill out the rest of our metadata. If you scroll down, you'll see here that you have this checkbox here called availability. So this availability basically means that am I happy to sell this? So if you want this to appear on the App Store, you want to make sure that this is definitely turned on, or else you're not going to see it. So we have the reference name that we discussed before. And like I said before, where you could input a price, you can't do that here. What you have to do is actually select from the drop down what tier of pricing you want to give. So you can see that 99p is not an option here. So I have to choose 89p, which is fine. So I'll choose that. Now, tax category, I'm not gonna lie, I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not gonna go to that. But if you know law and tax, definitely read that and check it out. App Store localization is the display name and the description of the item. So if we just go into here, we'll just copy that from here and then paste that like so. Cool. And now we have the display name and description that will show on the App Store. If you scroll down, you'll have App Store promotional. So if you want to have like a promotion for this in-app purchase, you can add that in here. Now, I'm not going into promotions in this video, so we're going to ignore that. But the next bit's pretty important. So this review information is essentially the information that you are going to show the reviewer when they're looking at your in-app purchase. So what you want to put here is a screenshot of your actual screen with the in-app purchase that you're offering. So I've actually got a screenshot in my, downloads. And if I just open this up, it just simply just shows you what the in-app purchase looks like. So we're going to select that as an option. So we'll just select this file and then we'll hit upload. And then this review notes is any notes to tell the reviewer about your in-app purchase. So this, we're just going to say. So now once you save this in-app purchase, if you actually scroll up, you'll see here that the status has changed to ready to submit. So now we're actually ready to submit this with our app. So if we just go back to our in-app purchases and we go to prepare for submission. Now I'm not going to fill out all this information and actually submit this. I just want to show you where you can find it. So if you scroll down, you'll see here that when you select your build for your app, there's a new option here called select in-app purchase or subscriptions. So we select this. We actually have a drop down where we can select all, or we can select individual in-app purchases. So if I had all of them here, I could just select all of them. But for the sake of this video, we're just going to choose the one. And if we hit done, we can now hit save, and then we can, send that for review if we wanted to. So a few things to note before we wrap up on this video is that with your in-app purchases, just like your app, they can take a while for them to propagate. So if they're not showing up instantly, don't worry, it will show up eventually. Another thing as well is that this is just a guide for getting this onto the store. So if you do have any issues with your app in terms of getting this approved, you may have to ask the reviewer or just, talk to Apple about how you can get that resolved. Something that you also want to look out for as well when you're actually, doing your submission is that when you're doing this, make sure, and this is super important, make sure that in your notes, you put specific steps of how to actually access your in-app purchase as well. So someone can actually find your tip jar. If you don't do this, the reviewer will say, I just can't find it. And what you should also do as well, I know this is saying that it's optional, but don't make this optional, definitely do this, is attach a zip photo or a video of you showing how to get to your in-app purchase. So essentially you want to make sure that you're holding the reviewer's hand to actually get to the tip jar within your app. So it's another really important step. Another thing to note as well is to make sure that you actually test your app in TestFlight. So I actually have a video on how to actually handle testing in TestFlight. I'm not going to go into too much detail in it here because you can go watch that video, but essentially upload your build. And when you download your build, make sure that you can actually see your tips within your actual TestFlight build. If you can't see the tips in the list, then that means that during the setup within AppStoreConnect, you might have missed a step. Now I'm still gonna have a little checklist at the, towards the end of this video. So make sure you stick around so you can actually make sure you've ticked everything so it appears. But this is essentially the closest thing to what an app reviewer will see. And if they don't see your tips within your actual, app, then they're just going to reject it. All right, I know I've thrown a lot of information at you there about things you should actually, check out. So I thought I'd just create a little summary at the end of everything that you should check out for, because I'm not going to lie to you all. I've suffered. I've had to suffer so I can make your life easier. So maybe you should donate to me on YouTube, man, because I've walked so you can run. So in this bit, we're actually going to just list out everything that you should look out for when you're actually submitting your app and configure it and all that kind of stuff. So the first thing that you want to look out for is you want to make sure that you actually fill out the agreements, banking and tax section in AppStoreConnect. So make sure that all the tabs are filled out and all the information is all sorted. So once that's all good, you can actually tick that off the list. Now, it's worth noting that when you fill out this information, it's not actually instant. It can actually take up to 24 hours. So just keep that in mind and actually wait to see that everything's been approved before you actually carry on and start testing out your in-app purchases. So make sure in Xcode as well that you actually have the in-app purchase capability turned on. So you, like I showed you in the section before, you add that to your app target. So it's actually got that capability there. You want to make sure that in AppStoreConnect, you actually create your in-app purchase. So make sure that you create either your consumable, non-consumable, subscriptions, all that kind of stuff. So make sure that that's all filled out in AppStoreConnect for your app, and you actually put in real data. So don't just put like test, put in real data, and make sure you attach screenshots and also information for the reviewer so they can actually see what your in-app purchase looks like as well. Now, when you're working with your products in AppStoreConnect as well, you want to make sure that the product identifiers are unique. So if you've already used that product identifier for a previous app before, there's a high chance that it's not going to work when a reviewer is trying to test your app with your tip jar. Make sure that each product that you create has a brand new identifier and they're all unique across all of your apps as well. Make sure that you actually test your app on TestFlight before you even submit. Essentially, on TestFlight, when you download your build, if you don't see your tip jar with your products, do not submit it for a review. Try and walk through this video and make sure that everything is set up properly before you even attempt to submit it for review, because trust me, if you don't see your products in your TestFlight build, then I can guarantee you, like literally, I'll buy you your favorite chocolate bar if I'm wrong. But essentially what will happen is that the reviewer will just reject your app and say, I can't see your in-app purchases, so you need to sort this out. Along with that as well, you want to make sure that when you actually do your submission, you want to basically hold the app reviewer's hand. Like literally, it might seem tedious, but trust me, I had to deal with this where I had to basically deal with like 6 rejections before I could actually get through to be like, okay, I know all the steps needed to actually put this onto the App Store. But in the submission bit, make sure that you write down steps detailed of where to get to your tip jar. And also as well, make sure that you write steps 2, and make sure as well that you attach a video showing the reviewer how they can actually get to the tip jar within your app as well. Now, if your app has been approved and everything's all good, I just want to give you this disclaimer that essentially it can take up to 48 hours for your in-app purchases to be approved. So if you're releasing an app onto the App Store and you've got a tip jar, I personally would wait until you can actually see those tips within your app on the App Store before promoting it to people, because your in-app purchases is a completely different review from your app review, which happens for the actual main app. So give it up to 48 hours if you don't see it. But if you do submit it and your app has been approved, just keep checking that on the App Store to see if you can actually see your tip jar with your products working. Once you see that working, I would then start promoting the feature. That's what I would do personally. And if you have any other issues as well, you can actually contact Apple support in Apple Developer, and they can help sort you out and see how it can help rectify any issues that you have. So we've actually got everything set up now to add a tip jar into our app, and it all works well. So we covered a lot of things. And like I said before, if you want to download the source code as well, it'll be in the description box. So that's everything in this video. If you enjoy my teaching style, I actually do have more courses on my website, which you should see now. And also as well, on my website, I've got a whole bunch of courses that are coming up really soon that I'm really excited to share with you as well. Now, another thing as well, I actually do have a YouTube membership on my channel. If you're interested in joining, that you can actually check out as well also. And if you found this useful as well, you can actually leave me a tip via coffee or the YouTube thanks button in the bottom part of the video. Now, if you don't want to donate any monetary value, that's fine, I understand. But what you can do to help support me for free is you can actually share this video, you can like, subscribe, and hit notification bell to get updates for whenever I release a new video. So that's everything from me. I'll catch you on a bit. Deuces.